The Hoax Alien Invasion. How Wernher von Braun revealed NASA's plan to weaponize space. Dr. Carol Rosine was the first woman corporate manager of Fairchild Industries, and was spokesperson for Wernher von Braun in the last years of his life. She founded the Institute for Security and Cooperation in Outer Space in Washington, D.C. and has testified before Congress on many occasions about space-based weapons. Von Braun revealed to Dr. Rosine a plan to justify weapons in space based on hoaxing an extraterrestrial threat. She was also present at meetings in the 70s when the scenario for the Gulf War of the 90s was planned. In an interview, Carol Rosine with Dr. Steve Greer stated, "My name is Carol Rosine. I am an educator who became the first woman corporate manager of an aerospace company, Fairchild Industries. I am a space and missile defense consultant, and have consulted to a number of companies, organizations, and government departments, even the intelligence community. I was a consultant to TRW working on the MX missile, so I was part of that strategy, which turned out to be a role model for how to sell space-based weapons to the public. The MX missile is yet another weapon system that we didn't need. I founded the Institute for Security and Cooperation in Outer Space, a Washington, D.C.-based think tank. I am an author, and have testified before Congress and the President's Commission on Space. When I was a corporate manager of Fairchild Industries from 1974 through 1977, I met the late Dr. Wernher von Braun. We first met in early 1974. At that time, von Braun was dying of cancer, but he assured me that he would live a few more years to tell me about the game that was being played. That game being the effort to weaponize space, to control the Earth from space and space itself. Von Braun had a history of working with weapons systems. He had escaped from Germany to come to this country, and had become a vice president of Fairchild Industries when I met him. Von Braun's purpose during the last years of his life, his dying years, was to educate the public and decision makers about why space-based weapons are dumb, dangerous, destabilizing, too costly, unnecessary, unworkable, and an undesirable idea, and about the alternatives that are available. As practically a deathbed speech, he educated me about those concepts, and who the players were in this game. He gave me the responsibility, since he was dying, of continuing this effort to prevent the weaponization of outer space. When Wernher von Braun was dying of cancer, he asked me to be his spokesperson, to appear on occasions when he was too ill to speak. And so, I did this. What was most interesting to me was a repetitive sentence that he said to me over and over again during the approximately 4 years that I had the opportunity to work with him. He said the strategy that was being used to educate the public and decision makers was to use scare tactics. That was how we identify an enemy. The strategy that Wernher von Braun taught me was that first the Russians are going to be considered to be the enemy. In fact, in 1974, they were the enemy, the identified enemy. We were told that the Russians had killer satellites. We were told that they were coming to get us and control us, that they were commies. Then, after the Russian threat passed, terrorists would be identified as the next threat, and that was soon to follow. Throughout the media for the next decade, we heard a lot about terrorism. Then we were going to identify third world country crazies. We now call them nations of concern. But he said that would be the third enemy against whom we would build space-based weapons. The next enemy was asteroids. Now, at this point he kind of chuckled the first time he said it. Asteroids, against asteroids we are going to build space-based weapons. And the funniest one of all was what he called aliens, extraterrestrials. That would be the final scare. And over, and over, and over during the 4 years that I knew him and was giving speeches for him, he would bring up that last card. And remember, Carol, the last card is the alien card. We are going to have to build space-based weapons against aliens, and all of it is a lie. I think I was too naive at the time to know the seriousness of the nature of the spin that was being put on the system. And now, the pieces are starting to fall into place. We are building a space-based weapons system on a premise that is a lie, a spin. Wernher von Braun was trying to hint that to me back in the early 70s and right up until the moment when he died in 1977. What he told me was that there is an accelerated effort in place. He didn't mention a timeline, but he said that it was going to be speeding up faster than anybody could possibly imagine. That the effort to put weapons into space was not only based on a lie but would accelerate past the point of people even understanding it until it was already up there and too late. When von Braun was dying in front of me, the very first day that I met him, he had tubes draining out of his side. He was tapping on the desk telling me, "You will come to Fairchild." I was a school teacher. He said, "You will come to Fairchild, and you will be responsible for keeping weapons out of space." The way he said it with this intenseness in his eyes, and added that very first day, the first time I met him, that space-based weapons were a dangerous, destabilizing, too costly, unnecessary, untestable, unworkable idea. The last card that was being held was the extraterrestrial enemy card. The intensity with which he said that made me realize that he knew something that he was too afraid to mention. He was too afraid to talk about it. He would not tell me the details. I am not sure that I would have absorbed them if he had told me the details, or even believed him in 1974. But there was no question that this man knew and had a need to know. I found out later. There is no doubt in my mind that Wernher von Braun knew about the extraterrestrial issue. He explained to me the reasons why weapons were going to be put into space, the enemies against whom we were going to build these weapons, and that all of that was a lie. He mentioned that extraterrestrials were going to be identified as the final enemy against whom we were going to build space-based weapon systems back in 1974. The way he said it to me, there was no doubt in my mind that he knew something that he was too afraid to talk about. Wernher von Braun never spoke to me about any of the details that he knew related to extraterrestrials, except that one day extraterrestrials were going to be identified as an enemy against whom we are going to build an enormous space-based weapons system. Wernher von Braun actually told me that the spin was a lie, that the premise for space-based weaponry, the reasons that were going to be given, the enemies that we were going to identify, were all based on a lie. I have been tracking the space-based weapons issue for about 26 years. I have debated generals and congressional representatives. I have testified before the Congress and the Senate. I have met with people in over 100 countries. But I have not been able to identify who the people are who are making this space-based weapons system happen. I see the news. I see the administrative decisions being made, regardless of who is president, or what party controls the Congress, and I know that they are all based on lies and greed. But I have yet to be able to identify who the people are behind the plan to weaponize outer space. And that is after tracking this issue for 26 years. I know that there are big secrets being kept, and I know that it is time the public and decision makers pay attention to the people who are now going to be disclosing the truth. Instead of weaponizing outer space, we need to make some definite changes and build a system in space that will benefit every single person, and all of the animals, and the environment of this planet. The technology is there. The solutions to Earth's urgent and long-term potential problems are there. I have a feeling that once we start studying this extraterrestrial issue, all of the questions that I have had for 26 years are going to be answered. However, I have concluded that the plan to weaponize outer space is based on a few people, who are intent making a lot of money and gaining global power. In large part, it is also about ego. It is not about our essence, and who we really are on this planet and loving each other, and being at peace and cooperating. The plan isn't about using technology to solve problems and heal people on this planet. It isn't about that at all. It is about a few people who really are playing an old, dangerous, costly game to pad their own pocketbooks and engaged in a global power struggle. That is all it is. I believe that this entire space-based weapons game is initiated right here in the United States of America. What I hope for is that with this information that is being disclosed, the new administration will do what is right. That is to transform the war game into a space game so that we use the technologies that are available not just as spin-offs of war technology, but as direct technological applications to build a cooperative space system that will benefit the entire world, and that will allow us to communicate with the extraterrestrial cultures that are obviously out there. Who would benefit from these space-based weapons? They are the people who work in that arena, people in the military, in industries, in universities and labs, in the intelligence community. This is not just in the United States, but it is worldwide. This is a worldwide cooperative system. Wars are cooperative. Just as peace will be when it breaks out. But right now there are a lot of people benefiting from destruction. This is what our economy has been based on in this country for decades, and it is now spreading around the world. Wars are being conducted for profit, not only political policies. Untold millions of people are suffering as a result. It is not fair. It never has been. Prots before old and people have screamed, out of swords let us build plowshares, let's have peace, and hold hands around the world. But it hasn't worked because too many people are benefiting from the mass destruction, which every war brings. Not only are they benefiting financially, but from what my experience is, there are people who actually believe that Armageddon should happen precisely so that we have to have these wars. So, the propaganda for the weaponization of space is going from the plans and pocketbook of a military-industrial complex, to the religious right. Some people actually believe that we have to have wars for these religious reasons, claiming that it's in the Bible. There are people who just love war. I have met warriors who just love to go to war. Then there are the good people, the soldiers, who just take orders. They have to feed their children, and send them to college, so they want to keep their jobs. People in laboratories have told me that they don't want to work on these technologies for war, but if they don't they won't get a paycheck. Who is going to pay them? But what I see is that there are not only dual uses for these technologies, but there are many users for the same technologies. We can build space hospitals, schools, hotels, laboratories, farms, industries. It may sound far out, but if we don't do that, we are going to build battle stations, and weapons pointed down on all of our heads, and back out into space. Apparently we have been doing some of that already. We have a choice now that can be made. We can all benefit. All of the people in the military-industrial complex, in the intelligence community, in universities and labs, in the United States, and all over the world, we can all benefit. We can just transform that industry so easily with a change of course, a change attitude, a decision based on our highest consciousness, our spirituality, and on the fact that we have no choice unless we all want to die. And clearly, we don't. So we can all benefit financially, spiritually, socially, psychologically by weaponizing outer space. This is technologically and politically feasible. It is possible to transform this game now, and everyone on Earth will benefit. In 1977 I was at a meeting in Fairchild Industries in a conference room called the War Room. In that room were a lot of charts on the walls with enemies, identified enemies. There were other more obscure names like Saddam Hussein, and Gaddafi. But we were talking then about terrorists, the potential terrorists. No one had ever talked about this before, but this was the next stage after the Russians against whom we were going to build these space-based weapons. I stood up in this meeting and I said, "Excuse me, Why are we talking about these potential enemies against whom we are going to build space-based weapons? If, in fact, we know that they are not the enemy at this time? Well, they continued the conversation about how they were going to antagonize these enemies, and that at some point, there was going to be a war in the Gulf, a Gulf War. Now this was in 1977. And even then, they were talking about creating a war in the Gulf region when there was still $25 billion in the space-based weapons program that had yet to be identified. At least it wasn't called the Strategic Defense Initiative. That was not until 1983. This weapons system, then, had obviously been going on for some time, and I didn't know anything about it. So I stood up in this meeting in 1977, and said, I would like to know why we are talking about space-based weapons against these enemies. I would like to know more about this. Would someone please tell me what this is about? Nobody answered. They just went on with this meeting as though I hadn't said anything. Suddenly I stood up in the room and said, if nobody can tell me why you are planning a war in the Gulf, when there is a certain amount of money in a budget so that you can create the next set of weapons systems, that will be the beginning of the sell to the public about why we need space-based weapons, then consider this, my resignation. And you will not hear from me again. And nobody said a word, because they were planning a war in the Gulf and it happened exactly as they planned it, and on schedule. Stephen Greer. Who was at this meeting? Carol. The room was filled with people in the revolving door game. There were people that I had seen once in a military uniform, and other times in a grey suit, and an industry outfit. These people play a revolving door game. They work as consultants, industry people, and/or military, and intelligence people. They work in the industries, and they revolve themselves through these doors, and right into government positions. I stood up in this meeting, and asked if I was hearing correctly, namely, that when there was $25 billion already expended in the space-based weapons budget, that there was going to be a war in the Gulf, stimulated, created, so that they could then sell the next phase of weapons to the public, and the decision-makers. This war was going to be created so that they could dump the old weapons, and create a whole new set of weapons. So I had to resign from that position. I could no longer work in that industry. One day in 1990, I was sitting in my living room looking at the money that had been spent on space-based weapons research and development programs, and I realized that it had come to that number, about $25 billion, and I said to my husband, I am now going to stop everything. I am now going to stop, and sit and watch CNN television, and I am going to wait for the war to happen. My husband said, well, you have finally gone over the edge. You have flipped out. My friends said, you have really gone too far this time. There is not going to be a war in the Gulf. Nobody is talking about a war in the Gulf. I replied, there is going to be a war in the Gulf. I am going to sit here, and wait for the war in the Gulf. And it happened right on schedule. As part of the war game in the Gulf, we in the public were told that the United States was successful in shooting down Russian Scud missiles. We were rationalizing new budgets based on that success. In fact, we found out later, after the budgets were approved for the next phase of weapons, that it was a lie. We did not have successful shoot-downs the way we were told. It was all a lie, just to get more money put in the budget to make more weapons. I was one of the first people to go independently to Russia when I heard that they had killer satellites. When I went to Russia in the early 70s, I found out that they didn't have killer satellites, that it was all a lie. In fact, the Russian leaders and people wanted peace. They wanted to cooperate with the United States, and with the people of the world. Another time, I called Saddam Hussein when he was lighting his oil fields on fire. My husband was in the kitchen while I was making this phone call. I got a call back from his first attaché with Saddam Hussein nearby, and he asked, Are you a reporter? Are you an agent? Why do you want to know? I said, no. I am just a citizen who helped to start the movement to prevent the weaponization of outer space. And I have found that a lot of stories that I have been told about weapons systems, and the enemies are not true. I wanted to find out what would satisfy Saddam Hussein so he would stop making these oil fields catch fire and stop antagonizing people. The fist attaché to Saddam Hussein replied, well, nobody has ever asked him that question, what he wants. So when I hear that there is a possible threat of extraterrestrials, and I look at the history of thousands of years of possible ET visitations, and hear the disclosures of honest military intelligence industry people who have had experiences with UFOs, with crashes and landings, with live and dead bodies of extraterrestrial beings, I know it is a lie. And if I am ever told that these are enemies against whom we have to build space-based weapons systems, based on my own personal experience of having worked in the military-industrial complex on weapons systems, and military strategy, I am going to know it is a lie. Not only will I not believe it, but I am going to go out as loudly as I can, and tell everyone to take a look. The ETs, have not taken us away yet. We are still here after thousands of years of visits from them. If in fact they are still visiting us now, and we have not been harmed by them, then we have to look at these visits as something that is not a hostile occurrence. It would be my hope and my intention to do everything I could to work with people who are working to communicate with, and cooperate with these extraterrestrial beings. They are clearly not hostile. We are here. That is enough a proof for me. There is no limit to how people can choose to live on this planet. We have a chance to do that, and I think that the window is closing rapidly. I don't think that we have much time in which to make and implement that decision. We are too close in too many ways to having some horrible disaster happen, or having some sort of worst war take place, whether it is from high technology or an exotic weapons system. We need leadership, and it has to start with the United States President, and that is who we all have to reach. If you are international, if you are around the world, if you are in the United States of America, whether you are from any party, any belief system or religion, the United States Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States is the person that needs to be reached. We need to say that we want an ultimate, comprehensive, verifiable ban on all space-based weapons.